Hey everybody, this is, I need to turn my volume off. Uh, this, Today's set of notes deals with what happens after Normandy and after the hedgerows. And the fact of the matter is, the stuff that happens after the hedgerows moves really fast. Hopefully you got this slide written down. As always, if you guys need to pause it, ask Mr. Rossler to pause it, take the time you need, and then keep moving on. When we look at the death throes of Hitler's Reich, it starts right at the end of the combat in the hedgerows, right after the date that you talked about with the Horror in the Hedgerows project last week, July 26th of 44. And you know, it's bitter irony in my family that the last day in the hedgerows was the day that my uncle died, but that was also really the turning point of that battle. So the 26th of July, they break clear of the hedgerows. They start storming out through the countryside because now you're into open fields that look a lot like Northwest Ohio. They're able to roll through with the tanks and the trucks and everything else, and really the Germans just start running ahead of them. There's one pocket called the Falaise Pocket, where they surround and capture tens of thousands of Germans in one day. Within a month, just in less than a month, Paris is liberated. The Allies push up towards the Belgian border. And the question then becomes, how do you get past the Siegfried Line? So if you look very carefully at this map that's on there, if you look at the red lines, they are part of what the West generally called the Siegfried Line and what Hitler called the Westwall. And this was a series of fortifications, a lot like the Maginot Line, but on the German side of the border. Again, with the idea they're not going to attack you at the strongest points. So if you look up there, if you guys can kind of identify where Belgium is and where Germany is, and you look where those red lines kind of double up, they double up near a city called Aachen. And if you look from Aachen down to the south, that's an area called the Hürtgenwald that we'll talk about in just a little bit. It's a really thick forest along there. So there's fortification, there's forest. It's a pretty difficult place to fight. And down at the bottom of it, if you look down there where Switzerland is, like Belfort and Colmar and Strasbourg, those are pretty difficult places to fight because then you start getting into the mountains and stuff. So you've got mountains and fortifications, forests and fortifications. Then if you look up at the top, you notice you have the Netherlands. And the two cities that you see up near the top there, the one that's outside the blue line is called Arnhem. And then just south of that is a city called Nijmegen. As you can tell, up there is where the West Wall stops. And so what our troops start thinking about, I should say what our generals start thinking about, is an operation a whole lot like the reverse of what Hitler did to us at the beginning of the war. Instead of attacking the Maginot Line dead on, he makes that hook maneuver up through the Netherlands. And so now we start looking at making a hook maneuver the other way around to get into Germany. So the plan they come up with to get around the edge of the Siegfried Line is called Operation Market Garden. And Market Garden is two parts. Market is this airborne drop of tens of thousands of paratroopers into the north of the Netherlands. They are going to capture 3 bridges that go across 2 rivers and a canal up there. They're going to go and flank, which means get around the wall. And then Operation Garden is pushing through a bunch of guys on the ground up the one road that goes up there. So the idea is Market happens first. They capture the bridges. They capture the road, which becomes known as Hell's Highway. And then the other guys come through in Operation Garden on Hell's Highway to reinforce these paratroopers. Problem was, a couple of problems with Market Garden. And this is, if you guys remember me during the war in Africa talking about the British General Bernard Law Montgomery and how this guy had a lot of ideas in his life and every single one of them was bad, this might be Montgomery's worst idea. Montgomery thinks this is going to be fine, that we're going to push 30 miles into enemy territory, surrounded on all sides, and this should work out just fine. We're not going to have cannons up there. We're not going to have air cover up there because the weather's going to be bad. We're not going to have anti-aircraft weapons. And so these guys are going to land. The airborne do a great job. They land exactly where they're supposed to be. They start taking their objectives, but there's nobody to back them up, and they're being attacked on all sides. That's what happens when you drop behind enemy lines. So they never had enough firepower. They had this one road that went up there for reinforcements, and between the plans being bad and then luck being bad with the weather and the Germans kind of knowing exactly where we were going because things worked well in the beginning, Market Garden becomes an abject failure. Once again, we come back to the idea of opportunity cost. If you remember when we talked about the war in Africa and Italy, we said every life you spend in place X is a life you can't spend in place Y. Every bullet you shoot in place A is a bullet you can't shoot in place B. So we just took 30,000 paratroopers, our best soldiers that we had, and we wasted them. We took a couple of British divisions driving up that road and wasted them. Most importantly, at this point in the war, we took fuel and weapons and troops away from operations that were actually successful. So one of the things that was going really well at this point, General George Patton, the American general from down in the African campaign, who then was in charge, if you remember, of the fake army during Operation Fortitude, Patton is making a comeback, and that's fine. And Patton's comeback is happening as he's leading this Third Army across Europe, and they're making a great push on Aachen in that Hürtgen forest. Had Patton had the fuel, the weapons, and the troops, and Montgomery didn't siphon them off from them, there's a good chance we get through to Berlin by Christmas. This, by the way, Market Garden is happening in late September. Market Garden sets us back months in invading Germany. If you read the newspapers from the time, most people believed the war was going to be over by Christmas. This was in September, and people were starting to make plans. If you read the newspapers back then from in Toledo, people were making plans on, when we have the VE Day parade in December or January, it's going to be cold. How are we going to keep people warm outside? People were totally convinced this war was going to be over, possibly by Christmas, definitely in the winter. But that doesn't happen because Market Garden kind of illustrates to us this opportunity cost. If you make a big gamble like this and it doesn't pay off, that has cost you a whole lot of things. So one other thing, you guys are watching this on, I think you're watching it on Wednesday or Thursday. I will be sending pictures back to Mrs. Rossler and Mr. Rossler to show you guys at the beginning of class, but this Operation Market Garden is exactly what Tommy and I are off researching right now. As you're watching this, we've probably been to the bridge at Remagen, or the bridge at Eindhoven, or the bridge at, the other town that I can't think of right now. But I'll be sending pictures back, and the pictures that we're sending you are going to be pictures that tie right into this Operation Market Garden. Okay, so Market Garden fails. And about the same time Market Garden fails is the time that the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest starts. I wish we had all the time in the world in this class, because the Hürtgen is the longest battle in the history of the United States Army. And a lot of people think Gettysburg or Vicksburg or D-Day, the whole Normandy campaign. Well, the Normandy campaign was over in 5 weeks. The Battle of the Hürtgen Forest lasts for 88 days. It starts in the middle of September. It goes nonstop until the 16th of December. And nonstop, it means nonstop. It means these guys were in combat every single day, all along that border between France and Germany. At the end of it, by the time we get to the end of the Hürtgen, we look at Normandy as being a disaster with about 25,000 casualties. This has 55,000 casualties. And the only thing that ends the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest is something even worse. And that something even worse is an operation that Hitler came up with because of the way our lines looked. You guys have heard this called the Battle of the Bulge throughout your life. If you've heard of it at all, you've heard of the Battle of the Bulge. And the bulge that it refers to is what's called a salient in the American lines. So instead of the battle lines being nice and even and parallel with each other, our battle line bulged into German territory. And the Germans kind of bulged the other way. And the question became, can you cut off that leading element? So Hitler's generals come up with this plan called Vakhtang Rhine, which means the watch on the Rhine, because this is happening close to the Rhine River. And the Germans very sincerely believe that if they can keep us on the west side of the Rhine River, they can win the war. Hitler thinks that one big offensive could break the Western Allies, split the British from the Americans, and force us to accept a peace treaty. So, once again, we go back to that plan from the very beginning of the war. Hitler puts his troops in exactly the place that he punked us in 1940, the Ardennes forest and the mountains there. And in this map, you guys can see the red arrows represent the German forces, the blue arrows represent the Allied forces. You notice that there's this massive push out of the bulge of these red forces, and they create a big, big salient into America's lines. They're pushing us, and they're pushing us fast near this place where Germany, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg come together near the German border. So they push this bulge out. The idea of it is that the attack would split the British from the United States. The British forces were basically to the north. The American forces were basically to the south. The Germans think if we push all the way out to the English Channel, we're going to isolate those four armies in the north, and Montgomery is going to have to surrender all his forces. So if you look at this map, you can see the bulge, right? You can see that line that says 6th Panzer Army objective and 5th Panzer Army objective going up towards Antwerp and around Brussels. And this is pushing all the way up to the North Sea. The idea is the Germans are going to be surrounded by the British on one side and the Americans on the other side. Now, do a little forward thinking. Do you want to be surrounded by enemies on all sides? And you might start seeing where Hitler's plan has a few flaws, as normal. Now, how does this almost work for him? Well, you remember our whole story in Fortitude about counterintelligence, how we're doing everything we can to fool these guys. We're doing everything we can to make them sure that one thing is happening when it's not. Well, the Germans get wise to that. And in December of 44, first week of December, they start using fake radio broadcasts, and they start convincing us that there's a huge army way to the north near Denmark. And so we move a bunch of guys up to the north, mostly British, to deal with this fake army that we think is going to invade up there. To the south, where they're actually going to invade, we decide, well, there's no danger there. So we load up that zone near the Ardennes forest as an R&R place for units that have been just destroyed in the war so far. And again, this is where my uncle's unit ends up. They landed on Omaha Beach on the 16th of June. They were destroyed by the hedgerows. They go down and fight in St. Lo. Then they fight at St. Malo. Then they fight across France. Then they fight in part of the Hurtgen Forest campaign. Then they get brought up here, not to be in battle. The whole idea was we're going to give these guys a break. And of course, they put them at exactly the place that's going to get attacked. Another thing we do is bring our newest units there. And by bringing these new infantry divisions over, the idea was, well, we'll get them in country. They'll get used to camping out. We'll get them acclimated before they get thrown into battle. And this is exactly what the Germans wanted. You have our most tired and our most inexperienced soldiers all in exactly the place where the Germans are going to launch their attack. And this goes about how you think it's going to go. Germany launches this attack in what was almost a blizzard. It was a lot of snow, a lot of clouds, and the Germans did it with that kind of weather on purpose. Their Air Force was almost destroyed by this point in the war, and our Air Force could not fly when it was cloudy or snowy. So by launching the attack on a snowy day, we can't use our air power to take out their guys on the ground. So they launched this on the 16th of December. It neutralizes our air power. It makes it very difficult for the Allies to fight back. Again, they're going to make really quick advances as they just, go like a knife through warm butter through these units that are half strength, like the 83rd Infantry, these brand new units, like the one I'm mentioning here, the 106th Infantry Division. They arrived in combat just a few days prior, and they were near a town called St. Vith. 8,000 of the 15,000 men of that division were taken prisoner in a day. Their commanding general just quit. And the 106 guys who were veterans of that unit were really looked down on for a very long time, because not even their first day in combat, their first hours in combat, their commanding general just gave up. And all of these guys get taken to German prisoner of war camps, and they have a terrible, terrible rest of the war. As this is happening, though, as we're getting our butts kicked up one side of the street and down the other, General Eisenhower and General Patton kind of realize, let them come. Let's not fight them. Let's let them push all the way through. Patton kind of famously says, let them go all the way to London. Because what they realize is that as this bulge is created, the Allies are going to be able to pinch off that bulge. So as if you guys remember the whole problem with Market Garden, you're basically taking one road and you're surrounded by enemies at the front and on the sides. And if they close behind you, you're completely surrounded. That's the idea here too. We're going to use the German plan against them. Please push as far as you want through our lines. And then we're going to put our best troops down where you started, cut you off, surround you, and reduce you. Now, that's the plan, and that's great unless you're one of the American units in the way. And one of the American units in the way is going to be the 101st Airborne Division, the Screaming Eagles, one of the legendary units in American military history. And the 101st was pinned down in a city in Belgium called Bastogne. And I've been there. Bastogne is kind of the size, if you guys have ever been out to Waterville, Ohio, it's kind of the size of Waterville. The difference being that European towns have really concentrated downtowns. So there's like 3- and 4-story buildings around a central square that's like a market and stuff. The 101st gets stuck in this little bitty town. They are surrounded by the Germans as the Germans push through. The German commander gives the general in charge of the 101st, General McAuliffe, the opportunity to surrender. He replies with the card that you see at the right with one word, nuts. And it ends up being a huge morale booster for the troops. Things were really bad in there, as you're going to see in a video that you're going to watch tomorrow. Things are really, really bad in this city. They are down to 1/3 rations, which means they're getting one meal a day. The guys were told, you may shoot 10 bullets today. And if you think about that in war, most people are shooting 10 rounds in a couple of seconds. You have 10 bullets to use today. It was a pretty hopeless situation. But Easy Company of the 506th, if you ever get a chance to watch Band of Brothers, it's all about Easy Company of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. They lead an amazing raid that breaks the German line. They're able to get reinforcements. They're able to get supplies. And that's really the beginning of the end. And the American forces are going to end up cutting off the Germans.
Hello.
Hi.
You didn't happen to find a portable radio laying around, did you?
We have not.
Perfect. Thank you. If you hear or see.
Yeah. If we see something, we'll let you know. All right, guys. How was that for a little entertainment? Golly nuts, where was I before the police department lost the radio? I guess I was talking about how the American forces are cutting off the German bulge, and once the American forces have encircled them, Germany's situation is hopeless. Now, here's why this is such a big deal. Here's why we talk with great fondness on the Battle of the Bulge. 100,000 Germans are killed or taken prisoner in the course of the 3 weeks of the Battle of the Bulge. Now, we didn't come out of this unscathed. We end up with 42,000 dead. And if you total that with the Hürtgen Forest, if you look at all of these attacks that were made on the West Wall between September 15th and the 1st of December, 140,000 Americans are going to be killed or seriously wounded in action in all of these different battles on the West Wall. By the time we get a month out from the beginning of this, the war was back to its original lines. We've pushed back to the lines we were on the 16th of December. And most importantly, the German army is broken. They pulled all of their best troops off the Eastern Front from fighting the Soviets to try and break us. And then the idea was they'd break us quickly and send those guys back to fight the Soviets. Obviously, that never happens. So what you have here is really a double loss for the Germans. They failed to break us, and they lost their absolute best units. And from this point on, from January 25th, it's really only going to be about 90 days until we're in Berlin. And the war moves were really, really, really fast after the Battle of the Bulge. So I know this was really fast. I know it was like drinking out of a fire hose. I was throwing so much at you so fast. Hopefully you took pauses in between. And I hope you guys enjoyed this just a little bit. And I'll talk to you soon, and I'll see you next week sometime. Take care, everybody. Bye.